people. I seen them being strapped, crying, because they didn't know what they did wrong. And the nuns spoke French. They were allowed to speak their language, but we weren't. There was never any hugs or anything, you know. They didn't even care if we got sick. There was one time I was sick and they didn't believe me. And when they did when they did finally believe me, they just sent me to bed. The food was terrible. It was rotten. I had a hard time, like the people were saying starving, we starved. We had lard. I don't know what kind of bread we had, but I remember having liver all the time. I hated liver because it was just boiled and it was like chewing rubber. When I first went in, I was in an old building and we had the big farmyards and there was days that there was no schooling, we had to go and pick from the garden, potatoes, corn, whatever. And that was our job. But I was in where they were starting to phase out, the farms were starting to phase out. It was just became a school later on, because they made a new building, a new modern building. And from this building only went up to grade 4. I used to think it was grade 6, but my siblings told me it was grade 4. And I remember us being transported to a public school uptown, and we were in uniform. And it was a public school where everybody wore different clothing. There was no, but here us Native kids, we all had uniforms. So it was really hard to try and, I had no social skills. You know, I couldn't even have a best friend in residential school because when I did, they'd separate me from whoever. You couldn't have a friend. You know, and I used to tell my children, I never had a best friend. I never could confide in anybody like they do today. You know, when you have problems, you go to mom or you go to your sister or anybody. I didn't have that. I grew up, you know, coming from a family of 12, I always say I was raised alone. Because even after residential school, we didn't know how to get along. We didn't know. But going back to socializing, I didn't know how to socialize when it came to going to this public school. You know, I just hang out with the ones that were from residential school, and that's when. Well, I had racism all my life, but from peers, that's when it really got to me within the public school. You know, being called squaw, and squaw's a degrading term. And so I did 9 years. I went in when I was 6 years old. I came out when I was 15. 9 years, I failed 1 grade. And as far as health went, one of the things that really got to me was there'd be a dentist that would come, and he'd set up an office right across from the classroom, and you could just hear the kids, you know, squealing away, and you're wondering, am I next? You know, you're just, you know, you're not even interested in the class because you're wondering if you're next. I don't know how I managed, but all I remember is that. I don't remember going in or anything. seen I've been like physically abused. But one thing that I can say about residential school, I was not sexually abused in school, but I was outside of school. Excuse me. I did not, I thought this was normal. I didn't, you know, when I came out of residential school, I didn't go home. I was 15, didn't go home. I see my parents. That summer I had my first job. I worked in a camp, a tourist camp, as a cabin girl, cleaning cabins and that. And then come September, my older sister had moved to Fort Erie, so I moved with her, and I went to the high school there. And it was a big transition for me. And I was a loner again. I didn't know how to socialize. As soon as school was over, I went home. I never did anything on weekends or anything, you know. I just went to school and back. And I got lonesome. I wanted to be with see my parents and that. So the following year, I went back home. But then, I wasn't told what to do. So when I went back home, I had all my Native friends. So when you're going to high school, got all your friends, you know. School wasn't important. Nobody forced me. Nobody told me what to do anymore. So it wasn't important to me. And then right from grade 10, I got married. You know, I fell in love with the first guy that paid attention to me. And being so used to being controlled, he was a controller. Told me what to wear, what to do, everything. And that relationship ended. Ended up with number 2, same thing. I didn't know it at the time. I was attracted to people that controlled. But I was at the point where I would start rebelling. I didn't want to be told what to do anymore. And so ended up splitting up. But I was so confused, so codependent. I needed somebody to be there for me to function. I needed somebody to tell me what to do. And one of my cousins, she went into rehab, and I said to her, you know, like, to me, I didn't think I had a drinking problem because, well, I did drink, but when I drank, I get so angry. And I said to her, when you go in that place, do you get to know who you are? And she said, yes, I do. So I really wrestled because I wanted to get to know who I was. I didn't know, I thought, to me, I was always told there was something wrong with me, so I wanted to figure out what's wrong with me. So this was 1982. So I walked past the treatment center, kept going, I'm not even going to think about it, I'm just going to do it. So I went into the treatment center and they said, you have to admit you're an alcoholic. I admitted it. It was good. Words. But once I got in there, today I know the counselors can see through you, you can't pull them. Because they pulled me aside and they said, you have problems admitting it, don't you? I said, yeah. I said, I'm okay during the week. I go out on weekends, I have a drink, and I come home, I'm fine, you know. But it wasn't that, it's what happened when I took that drink. I became this angry person. I hated everybody in the world. No matter who you were, you know, I was a big mouth. Like today, if I was like that out in Toronto, I'd get killed, you know, because I just didn't care about anybody, and I didn't care about me. So that was my first step to recovery. Today, like after that, I started just getting ordinary counseling. And today I am at the point where I'm taking grief and trauma for all the losses that I had. All, you know, in October, my younger brother died. He was only 57 and I'm 63. He died of cancer. And I wouldn't seen him, he was in Hamilton and Kavinsky. And I said to him, I said, Frank, I'm so sorry we really didn't get to know each other. Because he had his own stuff, I had mine, and we just stayed separate. And he said, well, Karen, that's just the way things went. He said, there must be a reason for it. And I said, but I just want you to know I love you. And he accepted it. And a couple of months later he died, but I spent quite a bit of time being with him until he passed on. But it's like that. Like I have the sister that's 8 years older than me. I see her, but I'm not really close to her. My younger sister, same thing. You know, we're not close. I had another brother that died last February, and I went home, and he's a twin to one of the brothers that used to stay in the States, and he moved back to Canada. And even though I didn't know him, I knew that the twin that did die, I was close to him. So I supported him, and I got to know him. But it's so hard to reach out because I know my whole family has a lot of pain. And you know, when you see my people on the street, they're suffering. They're suffering. That's their way of coping. That was my way of coping. That's all I knew. I lost a daughter on the streets, you know, and she's intergenerational. And I didn't bring her up, my older sister brought her up. And she ended up moving on the streets here, and she ended up getting murdered. And the guy is still on the streets. He hasn't been arrested. People know who he is. You know, and we talk about, like I said, they're still trying to get rid of us, missing and murdered women. Harper don't care. We're not on the radar. You know, and there's 1,200 missing and murdered women. We're all suffering. But one thing that I found out that I did, and I'm very grateful for it, was I started my road to recovery. You know, I am talking with my daughters, with my sons. I did presentations with my younger son. The effects that I had, because I wasn't the perfect parent. I did not know how to parent. I never had a parent with me from 6 years old on. I didn't even know what a teenager was. You know, when they start rebelling, I took it personal. I didn't know how it was. I remember when I had my first baby, I couldn't get this baby to keep quiet. I turned up the music, I went on the steps and I cried. I didn't know what to do. And that's another thing, is because of the way I was brought up, I never went running back to mom or anybody for help. You know, what do? I just try to figure it out. And when I try to figure it out, mistakes are made. A lot of mistakes. So I wasn't this, you know, good parent. I was strict too. they have to be at a certain time. You're not, you get it. You know, you're grounded. Very strict. And then when I had my last two, I thought, I've been doing something wrong. So I swayed the other way. And my older kids say they're spoiled, you know, because they got away with a lot of things. But I have good communication with all of them today. Like I said, I went with my son to, we did intergenerational, how it affected them, because it affects them. Because I went to it, it affects them. So I wanna go to questions. I would like you to ask anything. Don't be scared. Please.
Karen, I have a question. You said that you weren't taught your language by your parents. Why was that?
Because you get hit if you talk your language. My parents were fluent. They spoke the language, but they didn't teach it to me. And